Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Silvates podcast. I'm really excited this week. We have Julie McFadden, aka Hospice Nurse Julie, on this week. And to me, it's probably one of the most personal podcasts I'll do. And you'll find out very soon. So, Julie is a registered nurse working in the States, and she's been a nurse for about 14 years. And to put it into context, because I'm pretty sure she'll be too humble to brag, Julie is huge on social media, let alone on TikTok. She has over 500,000 followers with, and I checked this, Julie, 4.5 million likes. That's huge. So, I'd like to thank you so much for joining me today, Julie.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. Very nice. Yes.
Yeah. And that's definitely something that I want to talk about a little later. But obviously, the theme today will be, around the kind of work you do around the death journey and how important that work is in someone who is in hospice care or palliative care and in those end stages of life. I'm really interested in sort of who you are as a person and what led you to go into nursing. So, what was young Julie like? Did you always know you wanted to be a nurse?
Oh my gosh. No, no. Young Julie was a seeker and anxious. Um, yeah, I had no clue. I was I would say almost immature. Like the only thing that really mattered to me when I was younger was friends and being cool and that is literally it, friends and being cool, right? And but I was always a seeker of like, why are we here? What's life all about? I always felt this longing to know, and like a longing in general. Well, that didn't really have anything to do with nursing. Truth. I think that led me to study psychology in college. My first undergrad's in psychology, and I went right after high school, so I was very young. I graduated at 22 and um, worked in a mental health hospital as a behavioral tech. They called us, and actually, that now that I think about it, I'm just remembering this. I had a patient who fainted and hit her head and cracked her head open and bled all over the linoleum floor. And I remember freaking out, and they had to actually take me downstairs because I was going to faint. I was like making it worse. I was just like, I remember like not being able to say to the nurses, like, so and so fell and hit the, like, I was just sort of like, and they could see that I was just panicked. I remember seeing them running towards the scary thing that I was running away from and thinking, like, I want to be able to not feel afraid when something that like that happens. So that like opened the window to me about like, I can't believe these nurses just like ran to this person bleeding everywhere. That's crazy. Um, and then I also, like I said, I was young. So my friend was in an accelerated nursing program where she got her bachelor's degree in nursing. So a 4-year degree in 3 semesters because she already had her another bachelor's degree. So because of that one instance, and I was a little lost, and my best friend was doing this. It seemed kind of cool. Maybe nursing would be a good idea. I don't know. So I tried it, and then I ended up trying school. And I got into this program, and that like takes over your life. So, and I was really into it. Once I got into learning about biology and pathophysiology and anatomy and all of the things, I was like, wow, I love this. I love it. I was obsessed. And that's like how we started.
That's
I was
amazing. I love,
obsessed. Yeah, I was obsessed. Uh-huh.
yeah. And I love these links that we both did psychology as undergrads, and we
Hmm.
both developed after that into different, slightly similar, but different fields after that, but still healthcare related, still people orientated.
Yeah, for sure.
And because I've binged mostly, if not all of your videos on
That's
TikTok,
a lot.
I,
That's dedication. That's dedication right there. That's a lot of videos.
and there's a lot of great content that you put out and so consistently, but I'll come back to that a little later. But because I have binged a lot of those videos, I sort of know a bit about your background. I know you've done other types of nursing before you work in your current role as a hospice nurse. How have your other roles sort of prepared you for what you do now or influenced that?
Yeah, I mean, they did 100%. I had an idea of what I wanted to do in nursing school. I was set, right? I was like, now I try to talk to nursing students and say, like, you don't need to do what I did, which was kill myself for 3 semesters trying to be the perfect student and get so I could get the right job. And it was just so much pressure. And I feel like that's really drilled into you as a nurse, at least in nursing school in the States. It's like, you need to get straight A. Like it was just this culture of like you have to be the best, super competitive. Like anyway, so I try to tell people don't do that because it's not necessary. But I did do that. So I wanted to be the best. After nursing school, I literally Googled #1 hospital in the country, and then was like, done. That's where I'm going to work. And I went there and I drove 6 hours. It was only 6 hours away, thank God. It wasn't like a plane ride away. I guess I could have flown, but I drove 6 hours and I applied for 2 ICU nursing jobs that I wanted to work in critical care. And I got them both, which doesn't say anything about me really. It's like nurses are needed everywhere. That's what I always tell nurses too. It's like not to be a jerk, but like we need nurses. So you're probably gonna get the job. So you don't have to kill yourself during nursing school. You'll be okay. But yeah, so I was an ICU nurse. I had this whole plan. I was going to be an ICU nurse for 2 years. I was going to go back to school for anesthesia, make a lot of money, work in anesthesia, and that's what I was going to do. And then I became a ICU nurse and realized I knew nothing, and it was scary, and I had like nursing dreams literally every single night for like 6 months. Every single night I dreamt of nursing because it's just a huge learning curve. You don't know what you don't know. You think you know things, and then you actually do it, and you're like, and I was actually severely disappointed. Like I really, by 2 years in, I was like, I hate this. I hate nursing. I felt like soul crushed. Like going to work every day was like horrific. I hated it. And it wasn't because of people I worked with or because it was just like, it wasn't for me. I just felt like I made the wrong choice. This isn't what I want to do. I don't like nursing. I'm not like the other nurses. I don't like, I felt like constantly stressed. I don't know if you know the feeling of like where your chest is just tight all the time. That's how I felt. It was just like constant constriction. And that made me want to not nurse anymore. Um, but then I also started thinking like, just not this nursing. Like I don't like this. This is like I'm not getting to connect with the patients. I'm not getting to connect with the families because we're so busy and I'm running around and like your focus is like keeping them alive. And it's like you're not treating the person as a human. It's like, at least for me, it was like you had to hurry, hurry, hurry. You couldn't, like I always say, like you can't hurry up and care. Like at least I can't. I need like time. I need to like connect with you. I need to have time to educate and talk. And you just didn't have that. I didn't have that anyway. I didn't feel like I did. Every once in a while you'd have the time, but usually it's like you don't. You're like running around. No time to like truly talk to the family about what's truly happening. It gave me a heart to be like, I don't want if I'm and not everyone's dying in the ICU, but a lot of people are kept alive much, much longer than they should than I believed in. It was like I almost felt like we were doing a disservice to the person in this bed and the families, thinking their loved one's going to get better because their creatinine. I always talk about because it sticks out in my head of like this person who's clearly being kept alive, clearly not going to make it out of the ICU. And we'd still have these like morning meetings with the family and the doctors and all of us. And like someone would be like, well, the creatinine's a little better today. It's like, what? And then the family would fixate on that all day long. Well, the creatinine's a little better today. Like, and I'm just thinking, why are we not having a real conversation about what's truly going on here, which is this person's dying? And if I feel like if we said it like that, your loved one is going to die. Like that's I mean, I don't want to say it this harshly, right? But like I feel like sometimes you kind of have to for people to hear it. Your loved one is going to die. Do you want them to die here in this bed? after and never wake up and eventually turn off the machines and die here like this? Or do you want us to get them out of here, get them as good as we can, and then let them go home so they can die at home? I feel like most people would say, they're not going to get better. I want them to come home with me. Being in the ICU, I'll never regret it because I learned so much and I stayed there for 9 years. It's a long time and I learned a lot and it really made me who I am today in the sense of a super confident nurse. I'm really confident in what I do. Um, so I'm grateful I had that experience, but it was not the place for me. So I always encourage nurses now that like if you are unhappy where you're working, move around. We are nurses. We can move around. I feel like that's not always encouraged or it feels too scary. Um, and the whole death and dying process and trying to learn how to talk to people in the ICU and kind of advocating for my patients. To me, I was advocating for them, even though the end result would be death. I felt like my it was my responsibility to advocate for this person to push other healthcare workers to be honest. And I don't think no one's being malicious. It's just no one wants to talk about it or admit it or say the wrong thing or it's sensitive, right? But it's like after a while, once I started becoming confident in my ICU skills, I started being like, uh is anyone going to talk to the family? Like, can I talk to the family? If you guys aren't going to, can I say something? Because this is what I'm seeing here. Are you seeing this? And that made me want to, yeah, it just made me want to start continuing to do that. And then that's how I started becoming passionate about hospice nursing and palliative care nursing and what that would look like. That
That's
was a
amazing.
long-winded answer.
I love it. I love it because there's a couple of things that you were talking about there that really struck at me. One was this expectation of, nursing or ICU nursing in a way, and that kind of didn't match up, perhaps, or what you were doing didn't feel. I don't know. I can relate because in my sort of role, what I thought I was going to be doing as an undergrad and then actually doing it didn't match up for me. And so I burnt
Yeah.
out very early as an osteopath to the point where I was like, do I even really want to do this? And I had to step away for a little bit.
Hmm.
So that sort of jarring effect of, this is what I've studied for, but this isn't what I want to do, really resonates with me. And I'm sure if it resonates with me, it's going to resonate with a lot of, especially healthcare workers, where, you tend to be understaffed, underpaid, overworked.
Yes,
And
overworked. And you're taught to like at least here in the States, I'm sure everywhere though, probably even worse. It's like it's bred into you to like self-sacrifice, don't have boundaries. You're not a good nurse if you don't stay over to help your coworkers or help you know what I mean? It's like, nope, no. No, 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 no. Like that's a whole nother soapbox I could get on about like self boundaries and not owing your whole entire life to this job. Like none of that is sits right with me. But it took me a long time to get there. It took me a long time to get there. And I will say, just if anyone is listening, I truly like thought I hated nursing. I thought I hated it. It was like, and that's just not true. I love my job now, and I'm still a nurse. I love it. I would do it. I probably wouldn't do it full time for free, but I would do it for free.
we all have
Like
bills to pay.
yeah, well, right. Like if I had millions of dollars though, I still would do it. I still would do it.
Yeah.
So it can be different. And some people maybe just aren't meant to be nurses, but in general, I would move around. If you're in healthcare and you're not happy, I would move around and make it work for you because you can find the place that you fit, I
Yeah,
think.
absolutely. And the other thing that you said that really struck at me was, I wanted to advocate for patients. And certainly I'll tell you a bit about sort of, I haven't shared this with the listeners, but my mum passed away last April of this year, depending when
Oh,
they're listening to it, last year maybe. And there was one nurse in particular, and if she's listening, she'll know who she is, who was really and genuinely an advocate of my mum's when she was very poorly in hospital, and when because of COVID restrictions we weren't allowed to go in and stuff, and all it took was that one person to say,
mhm.
hey, something's not right, or hey, have the family been involved, or has anyone talked to the family? And it only took that one person to make such a difference to
Mhm.
not just my experience of this whole process, but to my mom's experience. Because from then, all the multidisciplinary meetings happened, the communication started opening up, and it opened up all these other doors that were just being shut constantly. And I'm sure, you must know that whole process better than me. I only know it from a family member's side.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I was like getting chills when you were talking about that because I feel like what happens is as a nurse, because I've been both nurses. I've been the robotic nurse who's kind of like and like kind of jaded, and you don't, not that you don't care, but a little bit. I mean, for lack of better words, right? You're just jaded, you're overworked, you're tired, you're sick of being met by people who aren't listening, or like, you're just hitting all this red tape all the time that you kind of get jaded, and you're like, and you just don't have the energy, right? And then I've been the other nurse that's like, hold on, something's not right here. Or you just know enough now to speak up. For a little bit, you might not even know enough to speak up. But now you've been doing this long enough to be like, hey, what's going on? No, 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 no. I'm not going to listen to this person. This is what it should be like. And then you can change the way things go. You do have a voice. And I also think that goes down to administration in general, like hospital administration and how hospitals are run, because nurses get so burnt out. I feel like that's how this compassion fatigue can happen, because we're not supported. We're not supported. And not everybody, not always, right? But a lot of times it's
Yeah.
like compassion fatigue happens because there's not a supportive administration, or the hospital's not run properly. Or I mean, I really do. I kind of blame, I'm a big advocate for like nursing unions, and because if not, I feel like we're kind of run to the ground, and then people blame, then the blame is on like nurses or faculty, when really it's like, no, that's a bigger problem here. But I'm so happy that that nurse was there, and we do have to remember that we can really make a big difference by speaking up and listening to ourselves. You know.
Yeah. And I mean, I work in healthcare, as we've already talked about, and myself. And one of the main things that I took away from this whole process was that I needed to advocate better for my patients. And
Mhm.
not just in a way to explain to them pathways of care or referrals, or suddenly in osteopathy, like how do we get an MRI of your back, for example, but really, who's your support system at home? Who's taking care of you when you can't walk up the stairs? That kind of stuff. And then really advocating against sometimes my managers or superiors, where they're like, oh, actually maybe this isn't. I'm like, no, this is serious. This
Mhm.
can't wait another 3 months to get a scan. This is pretty bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Because most people will just listen to what they're told, right? So it depends on who's telling them, right? It just
yeah,
depends. Yeah, so you have to, yeah,
yeah. And as sort of a patient or a family member of a patient, you don't know any different. You don't
I
know
know.
what those referral pathways are. You don't know what access they should have. And that's certainly something that happened in sort of my experience, my mom's experience. I'd say my brother and I, we were really fighting for referrals. We were really doing all that groundwork whilst in the hospital. And you could see that the nurses were just amazing. I'm not saying this because you're on the podcast. Like, they genuinely were amazing. And
Mhm.
so the I call them fights. They're not actual fights, but the battles we were facing were with the hospital administration, were with getting external referrals and things like that. And so I always felt like the people on the ground always have your best interest, and they always will do the best that they absolutely can.
Yeah.
But it just takes, like, in my case, that one person. And it sounds like for a lot of your patients, you might be that person who's advocating for them.
I hope so. Yeah,
Yeah.
I try. And I definitely do a better job now that and that's solely because I like what I'm doing. I take time for myself. I have a good work-life balance. So when I do work, I can work well, right? And have the energy and like the full tank that can give everyone, so I have the energy to do it all, right? And to fight for what I think is right. Um, yeah.
Yeah. And did any of your psychology background sort of inform you? Because you seem when you come across as quite boundaried in terms of your work, in terms of knowing your limits, in terms of giving the best care that you know without compromising care. Did any of your psychology background help sort of inform you of that or give you a springboard to looking at any of those aspects? Or was it purely just working in that environment and learning it from the ground up?
Yeah, I think it's mostly that, working in the
Yeah.
environment and learning from the ground up and um figuring out the hard way by not having boundaries and then being pissed. And then
Oh, yeah.
and just I mean, I've been doing this for 14 years, which isn't that long, but long enough to be like, "Oh, okay, this is what has to happen now." Like and just gaining the confidence and realizing that like I can, because what people think, I think, is that you set boundaries and now it's all going to be good. Actually, you set boundaries and people are pissed. And then you
Oh,
have
yeah.
to just deal with that. You have to be okay with feeling really uncomfortable that you just upset your boss or upset your other coworkers or upset, and it's like, and that gets easier and easier with time. But initially you're like, oh shit, everyone's mad at me now, and people cave then, right? But I just learned over time you don't. But I think what happened, the psychology background just helped because I think it takes a certain type of personality to want to learn about psychology, right? At least
Oh,
for
yeah.
me, like, I was like I said, I've always been a seeker. I still am. So I think all of that kind of helps me in general with like wanting to understand why I didn't like my job so much, wanting to understand what I could do to make it easier for me and so I could still like it, right? So it's just a combination of all of it, but mostly just learning the hard way just by doing it over and over again.
Yeah. And one of the things that you talk a lot about in your TikTok videos is the death process itself. And I always like to think of, and I probably am plagiarizing from one of your videos now, but I always like to think about the death process as a biological entity and a
Mm.
spiritual entity. And sometimes they intertwine and sometimes they don't. And I wonder if you can explain that sort of those two processes for us.
Well, I started out with my TikTok and Instagram purely for the biological side of it because I thought the biological side of death and dying was almost spiritual, for lack of better words, right? Like, but it was just like, or magical. It feels like it was a great example of like biology working for us from what I've seen over and over and over again. Meaning like our bodies are built to die. Most people don't know that. I know I didn't know that. And I was an ICU nurse for a bunch of years. I didn't understand that our body has like built in, like our bodies will take care of us in the death and dying process if you choose. I feel like you have to go on more, like when I say like die naturally, I don't mean like from old age, like people think. I mean, you might be dying from something, but you're not doing anything to intervene with that dying process, right? And so I started the TikTok originally just to educate people about like, hey, did you know our body does X, Y, and Z when it's dying, and look how it can take care of us, and look how it helps us, um, and to me that kind of ties into spirituality because it feels um I don't know, for lack of better words, like sacred. It feels like magical that our body can yes, it doesn't mean we live forever, but it means that our bodies understand that it seems like our bodies understand that it's dying. And it has like steps it takes to help us die more peacefully. And I want people to know that. That's why I started doing it. And then I think that surprised people, hence why I got people to listen, which was amazing. I was kind of surprised. I was hoping people would be interested, but most people want to not talk about death and dying. And then because then people started asking more spiritual questions, like it led to a more spiritual side because people were like, "Oh wait, what? Like what about this? What about this?" I don't know if I answered your question, but I think it kind of ties. I think it ties together. I don't at all set out to make it tie together because I want everyone to feel included. I don't necessarily want to educate so people like think there's a spiritual side. I
Sure.
mean, even though I think there is, but I don't want to try to push that. I just want to show what actually happens. And I feel like it kind of turns into a spiritual conversation because it's pretty cool and it feels spiritual.
Absolutely. And one of the things you said was, you wanted to create this sort of, I think what you've done is created this space where I hadn't seen anyone talk about death so openly, on social media or anything like that. And I think what's happened as a result is this almost this community has come together, and I can see I can recognize some of the names that leave comments now, and I still leave comments now and again, especially on Instagram. um, and it's almost you've created this space where it's okay to talk about death. And for so long and for so many people, that's something that we avoid talking about
Hmm.
because it's
Yeah.
scary and it's unknown and it's unsettling for some people. And it was for me, absolutely. And we talked earlier before, I've been in therapy and I'm still doing the therapy, and that's helped me immensely. So I'm appreciative of that. I remember one of the the first video I saw of yours was on TikTok, and I think my mum had passed away or died. Again, we'll talk about language a bit
Yeah.
later.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Uh-huh. And I remember, like, for me, TikTok was just a distraction. It was a really nice distraction from all the really shitty stuff that was going on. And it was, the lip sync videos and the dance videos and the jokes, and then I scrolled, and your video came up, and I think it was on morphine or pain or something like that. And it literally had been like 2 or 3 days since my mom had died, and I held my breath the entire video. And it felt like you were talking to me directly. I know you weren't, but it felt so immensely like you were piercing into me. And it's what I needed to hear because I had had so much conflicting information about pain at the end of the process. And I not that it's your fault, but I burst into tears, and I was in tears for like 20 minutes. And it felt so cathartic to be able
Yeah.
to be told it's okay to give someone pain relief if they're at the end stage of their life. And nobody gave me that permission to think that was okay.
Oh my gosh. Well,
Yeah.
one, it makes me want to cry in a good way. I mean, well, first off, crying is amazing. So I know exactly what you mean by like bursting into tears and having like a cathartic moment because you just need to release. Just need to release the tension buildup or whatever that is, right? So I'm so happy that it spoke to you. And this is like truly it means a lot to me to hear stuff like that because yeah, I mean that's honestly why I make these videos. And sometimes it's easy for me to brush it. It's easy for me to deflect it and be like, oh, haha, and kind of just I don't know, just deflect, right? So to speak to someone like eye to eye and have you say that, it really does mean a lot to me. That's truly why I'm making videos, and I'm glad they're helping. And I know that most people don't know the things, not that like I know, but like any person that's working in this realm knows. We forget that not everybody knows and that people need permission to take care of their loved one, permission to know that it's okay how they died. Everything that you saw is likely super normal, and pain medicine doesn't kill people. I mean, it really feels like it does because it gets huge bad rap. And I don't mean to say this so flippant. Like I know it actually does kill people, especially if you're abusing it, right? But when it's end of life, it's at end of life. It is actually hard. I'm telling you, it would be hard to kill someone, quote unquote, with pain medicine. It would be hard to do. So again, so the idea that that's happening, is like, I need to dispel this myth because it is not happening. It would be truly hard. Like we would have to work at it for that to really happen. Hence why people are like, do you ever give a little bit more to da 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 da? And it's like, a little bit more would not da 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 da. A little bit, you would have to give, I mean, whatever. It isn't, I'm kind of digressing, but like,
Yeah.
want people to understand that like the amount you would truly have to give to actually end someone's life is obscene, and that would never happen, right? So
Yeah.
give the
And
pain meds,
it
give the
really
pain
is
meds.
such a testament to you as a person, and true to your character. And I'm not ego brushing because you're on here, but I remember sending you a DM shortly after. It wasn't that same day. And you said, thank you for supporting your mother. Like, you don't know me. Like, you don't know my story. You probably get hundreds of, thousands of these kinds of messages. But the fact that you DM me back and said, and nobody had said that to me, like, thank you for supporting your mom. And I was like, oh shit, yeah, I did that. But you
Uh-huh.
don't think about it in the process. And so I'm wondering, can you talk me through? I mean, I've seen it, but can you, for anyone who's sort of in that stage currently, who's listening or isn't there yet, can you talk me through what that end stage of life looks like and what kind of things they might expect?
So before it gets to the phase we call actively dying, which is like hours, which is a few hours to a few days before someone dies, um, we're in like a different stage. So like before the actively dying stage, people can look a little different depending on the disease that they're dying from, right? So they could experience different things. And some are quote unquote worse than others. I hate saying it like that, but there will be more, I guess we could say more symptoms than others, right? Just depends. Um, but usually, and before the actively dying phase, the main things you're going to see are a lot of sleeping and not a lot of eating. A lot of sleeping, not a lot of eating. Some functional decline, which just means they used to be fully independent, walking up and down stairs, making their own food, doing their own thing, and now that's not happening. So they need more help with all of those things, which can be hard on everybody, hard on the person, hard on the people doing it for them. Um, but just FYI, that I always talk about the like, thank you for supporting your mom because it's like the truest act of love, I think, like to be able to, because it's so uncomfortable. It's not easy to do that, but you're doing it because you love that person, and it's like, it's just the truest act of love. I think it's such an act of love that goes unnoticed. Um, anyway, so that's what you'll see. And then the actively dying part, I always talk about that because kind of no matter what you're dying from, you're going to look almost the same. Almost everybody during this actively dying phase looks the same, which is mostly unconscious or in and out of consciousness. Maybe some disorientation, maybe not, depending. When they're awake, they could be disoriented or they could be oriented for a little bit. So mostly sleeping or unconscious. No food or water for the most part. Sleep like changes in breathing. So almost everybody has changes in how they're breathing. So it's very normal to see. Changes in skin color. Sometimes there's terminal secretions, which we can talk about. That's what everyone calls the death rattle, which everyone hates, but it's very, very normal. Um, and that's kind of it. And during that time, you just want to be with them and keep them clean, keep them safe, keep them comfortable. And we can always manage symptoms if they come up. Um, Sometimes they're a little restless. Sometimes they might moan or have like a little grimace that could show that they're in pain. Um, but for the most part, it's about being. There's no like doing. There's not much doing at that time. Just be with them. And just know, like, I love Barbara Carnes, my favorite author. She's like the queen of hospice. I love her, Barbara Carnes, if
I started
anyone's
following
listening.
her because of you now.
I know, oh my gosh, she's the best. I did an IG live with her and she talks about dying like the laboring process. The person's like laboring. Which I don't want you to think laboring equals pain. You don't have to have pain in there, but the body is doing weird things that are actually very normal. and it's just the dying process, and we can just let it be. And I think the fear is people don't see it that much, and their loved one looks really different. So something must be wrong. So we need to get in there and fix it. And they need people to be a little closer to bedside. I think hospice isn't super close bedside. We're kind of like in and out a lot, to say, hey, no, this is normal. I know she doesn't look like herself. She looks different. This is different, but this is very normal when it comes to end of life. And that is why I want people to listen to my TikTok and watch my videos, because so many people have written into me saying, oh my gosh, I thought my mom had a horrific death until I watched your videos and I realized everything that she was doing was super normal. And she had a normal death. And it's like, yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. And
yeah.
I only started to understand that process after. And that's when I started watching, like, your videos came up, and that's when I started watching your videos. And one of the things you said earlier was, you don't give them food or drink or water. And that's something that I definitely struggled with, because you think, well, at least initially I thought, but they'll get weaker if they don't eat, or if there's no water in the system, they'll dehydrate. So naturally they'll be weaker or more tired. And I wonder if you can tell me a bit more about that, about why actually they don't need food or water at this stage.
Yeah, this was the biggest lesson I had to learn too as an ICU nurse. I've literally never understood this. I never knew this. So when I first started my first hospice job, I had an amazing doctor that I literally like followed around. We did joint visits. I like regurgitate everything she taught me. She was the most amazing doctor ever. I love her, and she helped me understand this so much. And she's so full of knowledge. So one, during the death and dying process, during the end of life journey, I like to call it, if your loved one is awake and talking to you and asking you for food and water, and they can actually physically swallow and all the things are okay, 100% give them whatever they want, right? So that's what I always preface, because sometimes people will be like, my dad was begging for water. And it's like, okay, well, if your dad was begging for water and he can take it, definitely give him water. I'm not saying don't give them food and water. Give them food and water if they want it. But they usually don't, or they usually can't. So if that is the case, know that. So when someone's at end of life, especially with hydration, because you and I both work in the healthcare. So in the hospitals, we're giving everyone IVs and we're pushing fluids, 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 fluids. End of life will 100%, like 100%, 10 out of 10 times, if they're truly end of life, will make it worse if you give them IV fluids, because when you're healthy and your body's working well, you give a liter fluid bag of someone to someone, it's going to go intravascularly, it's going to hydrate them, it's going to make them feel better. End of life, it will not do that. So when you're giving, if you were to give like a liter of fluid to someone end of life, it wouldn't go intravascular. It would start going intravascular, then it would seep out. And third space, usually in their lower extremities first, then it ends up just becoming totally fluid. They'll end up becoming fluid overloaded, and then their lungs will fill, and then they'll go into respiratory distress. How do I know this? Number one, science. It's like a fact. But also, I've witnessed this in the ICU over and over and over again. We always flooded people with fluid, and they always had edema. We had people with they were anasarca, just like full body edema, because we're just pumping them full of fluid to try to keep them alive. So at end of life, um, the less you do that, the more peaceful that person will be. One, because you're not fighting over you should eat more and they don't want to. But two, the less you mess with the natural dying process, because the loved one is dying, right? That's the fact. That's the sad, painful fact. The loved one is dying. Nothing we're going to do about it. How do we want them to die? Do we want their journey to be peaceful and their body to do what it's going to do? Or do we want to try to fight against it? So unless we fight against it, meaning always offer food and water, always offer their favorite things. If they want it, great. If they don't, that's okay, because the end result will be death, unfortunately. But okay, so when we can accept that, when we can accept that, we can help them die more peacefully by just allowing the body to take its natural course. And food and water at that time is actually usually, I don't want to say bad, but kind of bad. It can like get in the way of things. It gets in the way. It doesn't do what we think it's going to do. Even people, side note, even people who have like a G tube, who like you are for, you have a G tube in your stomach and you're putting tube feeds in there, they'll still have low albumin and be malnutritioned because their body's just not doing what it's supposed to do. It's not absorbing the nutrients. It's not doing what it should do because it's end of life. So you could really try to be like, you know what, I'm going to force this. You could even say, I don't believe you, Julie. I'm going to get a G tube, put all the tube feeds in there, get an IV, get TPN, it still won't do it. The body will be like, no, it doesn't absorb it.
Often and this is so reflective of the TikToks and what you put out there. And what I'm appreciating is being able to maybe, selfishly ask the questions I want to ask, but also
Yeah.
expand on some of the things that maybe I haven't been able to put in a comment or something like that.
Yeah.
And one of the things you touched upon earlier was pain. And so I suppose, does that work the same way? You just allow people to have pain relief as much as they need in for
Yep.
the same process.
Yep, as much as they need for the same process. So, for the most part, once you get pain controlled, they will feel and act better. They might be lethargic at first, right? Because the body has to like kind of get used to it. But usually, once the pain gets controlled and it's been a couple days, they will actually be like, I feel better. I can do things. I can like their body will work better. Um, there are a couple times, so I don't want to paint this picture of like we have everything under control always. So like I feel like there are certain diseases, certain personalities, certain just certain people, right, who are either awake and in pain and agitated or asleep and not. Sometimes that is unfortunate. I hate when that happens, but that is the case sometimes where it's like we're still not so it's like we give them enough medication that they're comfortable, and that means they are sleeping all the time because when they're awake, they're not comfortable. Now, do we want it to always be like that? No. Is it like that most of the time? No, I would say it's not like that most of the time. Most of the time, we don't need to give that much medication for them to feel better. But sometimes, and it is kind of like we basically need to sedate somebody to make them feel better. That doesn't necessarily still mean we hasten death. It just means that they're going to be asleep most of their dying process because when they're awake, they're uncomfortable or they have terminal agitation or something
Mm.
where like you really do just need to heavily sedate them. Or sometimes too, we can kind of like overload purposely to kind of like because once you let pain or agitation get out of control, it's really hard to get it back down. So you kind of have to overload with meds to get them back down to usually sleeping. And sometimes they'll sleep really well for like a couple of days and then they'll wake up almost like reset where they're like, okay, they're like their bodies. I almost think it's like a nervous system thing where their body's kind of relaxed again. So they wake up after those couple of days of like relaxing and they can not be as agitated, not be in so much pain. It just depends. That's why you have a team of people to like to help
Yeah.
it, hopefully.
And I will preface and say that the palliative care team that was surrounding me and my family were amazing. They were so
Good.
supportive and explained everything. And sometimes I felt like they were holding back because I was emotional and I was, there's only so much you can take in one sitting. But
Yeah.
they were so supportive. And one of the things that the palliative doctor, and I hope she listens to this, and she'll know who she is. She said, "We've only got one chance to make this right.
Yeah.
So let's do everything that we can to make it right for you and well, for her."
Yeah. Yeah.
And that stuck with me. And I'm like, okay, let's get it right because you don't get a second chance at death.
Mm-mm. Yeah. And
And
to go along, I don't know if like to go back to your like the food nutrients, like because yeah, if you don't give them the nutrients, right, then they're going to get weaker. And I think to sum that up is like that saying that I always say, which I didn't come up with, but like your loved one isn't um dying because they're not eating and drinking. They're dying because they're not eating and drinking because they're dying, right? And even if we gave them all of the things, it still wouldn't do what we want it to do. It wouldn't make them, because their body is dying, right?
Yeah.
That's what we have to kind of rethink. And I even had to as a nurse. I was like, no, that doesn't make sense. Can't we just give them but I've actually physically witnessed people refusing to believe what we said, and then I see what happens, which is not good.
Yeah.
It doesn't do what it's supposed to do. So that's why I'm such a strong advocate for patients, really. Like, when I'm with the family on hospice who doesn't want to listen to what we are saying, which is do not force feed, do not this, I will try to educate with compassion, obviously. But eventually, if I really feel like they're hurting that person, I need to advocate for that patient and help them understand, hey, I know your goal is to not have them suffer. So you are having them suffer by what you're doing because you can't let go. You're making them suffer more. That usually will kind of get them in the mindset. Like, but there are times where I feel like I have to get a little brutal because I am an advocate for the patient. I have to advocate for them, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
And
and it's
ultimately,
hard sometimes.
you're the professional in the room. The other person is usually very emotional, not always thinking
Yeah,
rationally, and so it takes a really compassionate person to say, hey, this is in the best interest. This isn't because I
yeah,
don't want to administer certain things
yeah,
or not come in
yeah,
and do this.
yeah.
And if I can go back to sort of pain just very briefly, you talked about sort of like administering the pain medication and allowing them that sort of that ease of discomfort. I don't know how else to talk about that, but and sort of in my head, I was almost linking that to sort of what you said earlier, whereby people in the the active stage of dying will sleep more. And
Hmm.
so, are those correlated? For example, would you see somebody being more at rest or sleeping more because you've administered more pain medication or the correct level of pain medication, for example?
Not usually. They're usually sleeping more because of the dying process. So that's
Okay.
usually going to happen whether we give pain medicine or not.
Yeah.
Of course, side effects of pain medicine can be lethargy, constipation, all the things. So there are side effects. But for the most part, if someone has been taking pain medicine, that's not going to make them sleep more. They're going to be sleeping more because of the dying process.
Yeah.
If they're probably already sleeping more, and then if they haven't been getting pain medicine and then do because they need it, that can make them sleep more. But eventually, their body pretty quickly will have a tolerance for it, and that won't really be a big side effect. It'll just be because they're in the end stage of life, and their body is preparing itself, and that's one of the ways it does. Sleeps.
Yeah.
Sleeps.
And
Mhm.
you mentioned the rally earlier. Can you explain what the rally is?
The rally is insane. I've witnessed it. Yeah, it only happens in like 30% of patients. So one third of patients, and it's really specific, and I can tell because I got a lot of comments about this happened to me, this happened to me, and I'm sure it has, but I have to say it's super specific. So it has to be like the person is dying very close, like not having good days, very like seeming like this is getting close, and then suddenly they'll have a day, or a few hours where their personality kind of comes back, they have energy, they can like get up and go to the bathroom. Everyone's rally different depending on the energy level they have and stuff, but like it'll be a significant change where you're like, whoa, this is amazing. And then they'll die shortly after. So sometimes a few hours, sometimes a few days. It's usually no longer than a couple of days. So some people were like, my aunt had a rally for a month and a half. That I would not consider that a rally. Like a rally is like a burst. That's why I call it the surge. It's like a burst of energy, and then they die. Um, so I try to educate about all of this prior to any of it happening, because I don't want to be like the bearer of bad news. Like, well, like if someone's having a good day, I don't want to say.
Yeah.
I want to educate prior so people can kind of like be present for the rally and be happy, be there and kind of understand, hey, this might be the last hurrah and let's
Yeah.
enjoy it.
Exactly. And it's that not giving them
Yeah.
false expectation, but enjoying that present time that they might have this
Hmm.
burst of energy in a way. And I think that's so important. It was definitely described as the surge, and you've said both interchangeably. Um,
Yeah.
One of the things that you talk a lot about in your videos is the language that we use surrounding death and the adjectives or the words that we use to describe. Can you talk to me a bit more about that?
Yes. So I feel like I had a stronger opinion about this before, where I really wanted to, what I want to get used to is saying death and saying dying and saying died and saying dead. Even as I'm saying those words, even me, someone who's around it all the time, gets a little, ooh, I feel like I'm hurting people by saying it, even saying it to you. But I think that's the problem. That's the problem, that we have this culture where we don't say died or dying, um, because we just makes us all uncomfortable and no one wants to be uncomfortable. So we just avoid it by saying other things like passed away, gone. Um, Now, but I've changed my tune a little bit because I do understand that softening it a little bit, for people who have lost, there's a word, lost someone, right? It's nice. Yeah, you have to meet people where they're at. So I can't force someone to be like, die, dead, bad. That's not going to get me anywhere. Um, so I do understand that the word passed away. I mean, I say passed away all the time. I catch myself all the time. And I don't think there's really anything wrong with saying that. I just want to start opening our eyes to the fact that it makes us all uncomfortable to say death, dying, died. I guess I shouldn't put that, not, maybe not everybody, but most people, even me, who's a hospice nurse who sees it and talks about it day in, day out. Because we don't have, because it doesn't have to be, to me, death is not the worst thing. Suffering is worse. Or
Yeah.
there's just other things that are worse. And I think half the reason why we think it's so awful is because we refuse to talk about it. And we refuse to say those things, say words like that, tell someone they're dying. We don't want to tell people that.
Yeah.
And I have seen the power, what's the word? Like, I've seen the power it may give someone and the relief it gives someone to be a person who can say that to someone and be there with them when I say it and have them say, okay, well, then what happens now? Like, I've seen people get relief from having a person who's not uncomfortable saying you're dying and here's how long. And so, and kind of in that way, um, because it gives, yeah, I think now, not everybody, right? Not everybody. You have to kind of ask them too. I love it. I worked with this, or I went on another podcast with another palliative care doctor who said she asks her patients how they want to hear news. Do you want it blunt and straightforward? Do you want it a little sugar coated? She actually asks them before she says
Wow.
anything. And I thought, yeah, that's true. Not everyone is like me. I would want it straightforward because that's how I need to kind of be black and white. Like, I need that in my brain, but not, maybe some people don't. That's why I started changing my tune after I talked to her. I was like, that's right. I don't need to make people like um believe exactly what I believe, but I do want to change the conversation around those words and
Yeah.
take the stigma away from it.
Absolutely. And I've,
So,
during the course of this course, used die and passed away interchangeably. And I think after watching that video, it helped not reframe, but made me more conscious of the words I was trying to use and what my intention behind the word was,
yeah, yeah,
because that can be so powerful.
yeah. It gives people permission sometimes, like permission to talk about it, permission like, oh, this person's okay. They can handle it or they can talk about it. Or I have found that the more I seem okay with talking to somebody about their end of life journey, the more they're willing to talk about it versus trying, because everyone, gets uncomfortable. Oh, like even doctors and nurses, they get uncomfortable with a person trying to talk about their own end of life sometimes.
Yeah,
Eh,
and often
Yeah.
those conversations about saying to that loved person is it's hard. It's it's and I promised myself I wasn't going to cry, Julie.
I
But often it
know.
is one of those conversations that you might not have, or it's difficult to have, or you rely on other professionals in the room to
Yeah.
initiate. And
Yes.
and I suppose thinking about sort of like family members or caregivers, like what do you think they could do in that sort of that actively dying stage that would be helpful or
During the actively dying phase, if their loved one is unconscious for the most part, I would say knowing their loved one, right? So, like, if your loved one, I would still treat your loved one like they're there, right? And you always want to keep them clean, safe, and comfortable. That's my big thing: clean, safe, comfortable. So, as long as they're clean, safe, and comfortable, then the add ons would be knowing that loved one, right? So, if your loved one likes quiet, then be quiet and hold their hand if they like that, right? Or if your loved one likes The Price is Right, which is a TV show here. I don't know if like, or likes soap operas, or likes Frank Sinatra, or likes whatever. Like, have that stuff being like, I would create a sacred almost space for them, because this is a special time to me. This is a special time for them. This is a special time for them. So, like, and for you. So you can create a space that you think they would like, um, and just sort of be there and talk to them like they're there, because I do think they can hear you. Um, and that's it. There's actually not much to do. That sort of just be the present moment, being willing to be uncomfortable, because it's hard, right?
yeah.
So, like, trying not to avoid it, uh, because it's hard. You know? Like
In
I said,
fact,
I feel like that's, like, the greatest act of love.
yeah, in fact, that's one of the things that you talk about regularly is you talk about hearing being one of the last senses to stop working. Is that
Mhm.
is that right?
Yeah. So they've done, I say they, I have looked up the studies, but I don't know them enough to, like, rattle off who did it and where it was, but they've done studies on EEGs on dying brains,
Yeah.
and like, hearing is the last part of the brain to kind of shut down. And then also, just a side note, people in the ICU who are intubated and sedated, and they also who don't die but they end up coming back, they do say that they hear people, that they heard people
Wow.
during that time. So, just
Yeah.
FYI. They didn't say it sounded scary. Like, sometimes people think that sounds scary, but really they said it was comforting, and it was like intermittent. They could, like, hear things, and they could tell which nurse was their nurse. And so.
And one of the things that resonated with me was, when a person has died and, they actively remove the body from the room to the morgue or wherever they go, what I didn't, I suppose, pay more attention to was the impact that has on staff. You have then a funeral to arrange and family members to inform, and you have 100 things to do. And what was really touching in my circumstance was a lot of the nurses came to my mom's funeral,
Oh,
and I
yes.
didn't expect that. And I thought that was just such a sweet gesture.
Yeah.
And I suppose my question to you is, given the work that you do, what impact that does that have on a healthcare professional, not just a healthcare professional, but as a human, after someone's not just died, but has physically left that room or that area or your ward, for example?
Mhm. So, one, just FYI, I found it harder. So now I visit people in their homes, so I don't actually. So it's a little different.
Yeah.
But in the ICU, I feel like it was a little harder, when people died, because to me there was a lot of suffering in their death, and I didn't. It was just harder. It was a struggle. It was more of a. It was just more of a struggle, and it like, stuck with me a little more. for me anyway, personally, in being a hospice nurse, there is sadness, right? But it doesn't actually feel super sad to me. It feels more like sacred, and I'm like happy for them. And I know the family's sad. I know the pain, right? I understand that there's like pain, and I feel bad for that. And I feel like compassion for that. Um, but as a nurse, it's like how it feels is like it feels like we did a good job,
Yeah.
right? So, and I feel like I said, I don't think death is the worst thing, right? So it doesn't feel super depressing to me. Um, there are definitely people I remember a little more, and I've have a little, and usually those are like younger people because they usually take longer to die, and they have kids, and I'm really close with their wife or their, so like those people kind of like it's harder because they usually suffer more. So really, I'm more affected by if someone's like suffering along the way. That is when I'm like, that's when I go home and I'm super sad. I want to make sure it's like they're not suffering, right?
Yeah.
So that is what brings me more issue than the actual death. Um, if anything, it's like it just feels like a sacred moment, and I'm like, I feel like honored that I get to be a part of it, and honored that the family is there and I can help them in any way. Like it feels beautiful, despite the pain of it, I guess.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you
Yeah.
say that because throughout this whole process and watching, some of your videos, the one thing I've come away from is as a health professional, I need to advocate more for the people that I'm treating or that I care for. And death doesn't scare me anymore. And I wasn't expecting
Hmm.
that. I've seen it. I've not that I've lived through it, but I've lived vicariously through it. And it doesn't scare me now. I'm not
Yeah.
scared of the process. I'm like, actually, if I had people around me that I loved and just supported me the way I was able to do that, death would be the release in a way. And
Hmm.
yeah,
I feel the same. Yeah.
yeah,
Like I don't want to die tomorrow, or, but I know I'm going to die, and I don't have fear about it.
yeah.
Actually, I'm going to do a video about that now that I think about it. I'm going to do a video about that.
There you go.
Good job. Thank you.
I'll look out for it. Speaking of videos, I'm just so appreciative of your time. I have like 2 pages of notes that I wanted to ask you on, and
Oh
so
my
I've just
gosh.
I've just loved this whole conversation, and like I said before, I've really appreciated you opening up this space for people to talk about death so openly and candidly, and give information that's accurate and not, you know, um, derived from old wives' tales of things like that. It's
Yeah.
it's science, it's the truth, it's so pertinent to a lot of people that are going through this, not just the people who are caring for them, but the actual people who are living through that experience. And so I've just been amazed at the prolific content that you do make, because it feels like you're always on my For You page on TikTok, which is great.
Uh,
And I don't cry in your
that makes me
videos.
happy.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't cry now when I see your videos, which to me is a good sign. But for anyone who isn't familiar with sort of your content, where can they find you? Yeah,
So I'm on TikTok and Instagram. At Hospice Nurse Julie is the handle for either one of those. I finally got Reels, which is a big thing on Instagram. PS, I did not have that before. They wouldn't grant me access to it, so now I have like full access to all of Instagram. So
perfect.
that makes me happy because I actually think it's easier to do stuff on Instagram. But TikTok and Instagram, they are a little different depending on which one you have. But Hospice Nurse Julie,
Yeah.
that's where I'm at.
And
Mhm.
I so look forward to the next live because those are always so enlightening. So I will
Oh my
keep
gosh,
watching you.
thank you. Thank you so much. You're so, yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks.